So now we're going to factor using the distributive property, and kind of undistributing is what this is called, and I may have used that word to start with before, but really it is called factoring when you undistribute. So you're looking to see what they have in common, the GCF. So you can go through the procedure we learned yesterday if you need to find the greatest common factor, but in most cases you'll probably be able to look at it and see. But make sure you do get the biggest thing in common or you won't really have this done correctly. So I start with my numbers. What's the biggest number that goes into 12 and 16? Well, you should come up with 4. What's the biggest factor of a squared and a? Well, again, if we write it out and circle what we have in common, we have a group of a's, so it would just be a. So that's what we're going to factor out or undistribute. So factoring out is really the reverse. When you're distributing, you're multiplying, so when you're factoring, you're dividing. So we're really dividing 12a squared by 4a. So we're ending up with 3a. When you divide 16a by 4a, you end up with 4. And you are done. Probably a good idea to check this, because if you didn't get the biggest thing, maybe we had 6a plus 4 here, then we would know that we didn't do it correctly. We needed to find something bigger they had in common. So again, let's start with the numbers, 18, 12, and 9. What's a number that goes into those? And the biggest number would be 3. And look at our c's. We have a c to the second, and c, so the biggest thing in common is a c. We have a d to the second, a d, and a d, so they all have at least one d. So that is your greatest common factor here. So now we're going to divide each term by this factor. So we're going to get 6d plus 4c plus 3. And again, just double check 6, 4, and 3. Nothing else goes into them. They're relatively prime, the word we learned yesterday. Okay, here's one for you to try. So again, look at your numbers. We got 12, 24, and 30. What's the biggest thing that goes into all of those? And you should come up with 6. Variable-wise, we got x, and x squared, so the biggest is an x. We got a y squared, and a y to the 4th, so y would be our biggest common factor. So 6xy. Again, when you divide 12xy by 6xy, you're just going to be left with a 2 plus 4y minus, make sure you keep track of your signs, 5xy to the 3rd. Again, glance through there and see if you have anything in common, and you don't, so you should be done. Alright, when we look here, we really don't have anything in common in all 4 terms, so we're going to look to group, and that's a big thing that you'll probably do in when you have 4 terms. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll group them the way they are. Sometimes you might have to move them around to group them, but they do have things in common if I group them here. So what do they have in common in this first parentheses? I have a 4b in common, leaving me with a plus 2. This next one I have a 3 in common, and watch your sign, it is a positive, so it's not hard here, but eventually we'll have some troubles with signs, I'm afraid, and it leaves us with a plus 2. Well, now you should notice that there is a common binomial. So I'm going to factor that a plus 2 out. If I factor it out of this first term, it leaves me a 4b. I factor out of the second term, it leaves me a 3. So that's a little tricky there, factoring by grouping. So when you have 4 terms, you still can look to see if there's something in common in all of them, but most likely you're going to have to probably do some form of grouping. And again, it won't always be the first 2 and the last 2. You might have to move them around. And there's sometimes different ways that you can group them, so it just kind of depends. Again, if I got 4 terms, nothing in common in everything, so I want to look to group, and again, these first 2 have something in common, these have something in common. So here I can factor out a 5y. It leaves me with y minus 3. Here I can factor out a positive 4. It leaves me with y minus 3. Now, is this factored? No, because we have a plus sign. Remember, factor means things being multiplied together. So I do notice, again, they have the quantity y minus 3 in common. I take that out, I'm left with 5y plus 4, and now it is factors because it is being multiplied. Alright, we look at this one, and they do have an x in common in the first one, but the second one doesn't have anything in common, so you might want to try changing the order. Again, I don't know what to tell you for sure. I'm going to try minus 2y. Please keep track of your signs because that is important. So now if I group these 2 together, I can see they have a 2y in common, leaving me with x minus 1. Here they have a 7 in common, leaving me with x minus 1. Now again, if I didn't get something in common, that's a clue that I probably ought to go back and try a different grouping. So if I factor that x minus 1 out, it leaves me with 2y plus 7. So you got to try some different things. Sometimes it's going to be a kind of guess and check as to how to pair them up, but make sure they have something in common when you're trying to pair them up like that. All right, again, yeah, they look like they're okay. The 35, they each have something in common, so I'm going to group them the way they are. What do I have in common here? I have a 5x, so I take that out, I'm left with 7 minus y. Over here, when I factor out the 3, I'm left with y minus 7. Not the same thing, but they do look kind of alike. So what can I do to make them look alike? I can factor out a negative 1. It doesn't really matter which one. I like y minus 7 better, so I'm going to factor a negative 1 out of this first term, well, actually out of here, right here. So if I take a negative 1 out of that, I'm going to bring it out in front. It's going to make it negative 5x. And if I take a negative 1 out of 7 or divide it by negative, it's going to make it negative, and the y is going to become positive. Now you see what I was trying to get, I hope, that they now have a y minus 7 in common. So the quantity y minus 7 times the quantity negative 5x plus 3. Now, could you have factored out a negative 1 here? Yes, you could have. And so if you did that, you would be left with 5x times 7 minus y minus 3 times 7 minus y. Then you have a 7 minus y in common, and you're going to get 5x minus 3, and those are equivalent answers. So something to pay attention to on that.